You're human beings who are dealing with a difficult situation with somebody that you cared about very deeply. And it affected you personally in the kind of time that your parents had to spend with you because they were distracted by their heart child. And it affected you personally in the sense that you loved your siblings and you wanted to take care of them too.
Welcome to the CHC podcast. I am Anna Jaworski and a heart mom to an adult with a single ventricle heart. I have a co-host here with me today.
I'm Ayrton Beatty, and I'm a bereaved sibling of a brother who died from an undiagnosed heart defect, and I have drug-induced long QT syndrome due to treatment for my chronic health conditions.
Today's episode features a very special panel of guests. All of our guests today are siblings of someone born with a heart defect. With us today are Roy Simkhay, Michelle Steltzer, Stephen Guerin, and Amy Cowin.
Roy Simkhay is Guy Simkhay's younger brother. Roy is 5 years younger than his brother and was an adult when his brother received a heart transplant. Roy is a computer programmer for a real estate company. Roy has visited Guy in the hospital on multiple times to support Guy. Michelle Steltzer is a bereaved sister. Her brother, Greg Romanesco, was born with a single ventricle heart. Born in 1968, he had a classic Fontan in 1985, but ended up having a heart transplant at Mayo Clinic in 2015. Sadly, he passed away from complications related to his heart transplant.
Amy Cowin is sister to Jessica Cowin, who was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, or HLHS. Jessica also had a classic Fontan and also needed a heart transplant. Amy's story is unique because she gave her sister Jessica a kidney when Jessica was in kidney failure. Stephen Guerin is brother to Cora, who was on the CHC podcast for our National Transplant Awareness Month episode just this past April. Like most of the guests on this panel, Stephen's sibling was born with a single ventricle heart, HLHS, and required a heart transplant.
Roy, welcome to the CHC podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here today.
Roy, what was life like for you growing up with a sibling with a CHD, considering you had an older sister and an older brother with a heart condition?
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of three. Guy, my oldest sibling, was born with a congenital heart condition. A lot of our sibling life growing up together was similar to other siblings, playing together, vacations together, fighting often, but always making up and having a lot of fun together. I think in relations to my brother having a heart condition, one of the things that meant that may have been different from other sibling relationships was perhaps I had to become a bit more mature at a young age. If I think back to it, Guy had numerous surgeries throughout our childhood. That's a scary thing to go through, to be worrying about him and to know that you can't take your sibling for granted. I think that was one of those things that really helped to mature me a little bit at a younger age. He also had a lot of restrictions on him, things he couldn't do because of his delicate heart situation. So that also took an extra level of maturity. On the one hand, Guy's 4 years older than I am. He's always been somebody I looked up to so much growing up. But if we were roughhousing or goofing off, I also had to sometimes be the one to stop to make sure that we were taking care of his heart restrictions and not doing anything unsafe. It took a little bit of extra maturity, I would say.
Yeah, I can fully understand that, especially roughhousing with a brother. You'd have to have boundaries in place so you wouldn't put his health in jeopardy.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one of those things that you don't normally otherwise have to take into account, but absolutely love my brother.
Michelle, welcome to the CHC podcast.
It's an honor to be asked to join and looking forward to the conversation.
Michelle, do you have any other siblings?
Thanks for asking. I was born and raised in the heart of the valley in Wisconsin, sandwiched in the middle of three siblings. Older brother, 3 years older, Jeffrey, followed by Greg with congenital heart disease in 1968, and then myself in 1970. My younger brother was born in 1973. No one in the family had any other medical concerns. Regarding life growing up, I never connected or knew about child life specialists, psychologists, social workers within the medical community to give perspective about the context of what congenital heart disease meant. And as a consequence, had little emotional, social, educational knowledge. My view of congenital heart disease was a bit of a mystery to navigate. My parents would get their education from their cardiologist and bring it down to the family to the best of their ability, but they were not medical. I was curious about congenital heart disease as I became older and recognized the direct impact of my brother. I knew Greg was unique in that he saw a pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Gallon, for regular follow up. As I got older, his appointment in Milwaukee Children, 2 hours away, I knew that his heart plumbing was abnormal, but I didn't really understand anything else about that other than he may need a transplant. He talked about being a guinea pig. Basically, he had very complex lesions, with predominantly right ventricular dominant ventricle, and was balanced enough to survive at birth and had a classic DTT shunt. I never really knew about the Fontan until it happened in my brother's high school years in 1985 when Dr. Francisco Puga at Mayo did his Fontan. As I learned over the years, this was my why. Timely education happened in ninth grade with an opportunity for anatomy and physiology, but that did not ever touch congenital heart disease. And certainly, Greg educated me about the chest tube hotel at Mayo. Thankfully, my folks always had insurance and was never left to follow up due to the financial burden, irregular care, unexpected arrhythmias, pacemakers, ER hospitalization, and was able to ultimately have his spontan surgery 5 hours away at the Mayo Clinic and ultimately transplant.
Wow, that was such a huge history lesson right there, Michelle. I mean, your brother was at the forefront of people with single ventricle hearts actually surviving.
Yeah, I am so grateful for the 47 years that I had my brother present on earth.
If I'm not mistaken, we learned from the intake form that your parents were told he wouldn't survive past the age of 2.
That's correct. Fortunately, he was well balanced enough when he was postnatally diagnosed that he did survive until he was 2. And then when he did not die, they had an opportunity to give him a platelet calcium shunt, a classic shunt that was done by a general surgeon, actually.
Wow, done by a general surgeon. That's just amazing. Well, thank you for being here and for sharing so much. I'm so grateful to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's an honor again to be here.
Amy, welcome to the CHC podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Amy, it was just you and your sister Jessica growing up, and you were the younger sister. What was the hardest part of growing up with your only sibling having a heart condition?
I don't know about the hardest part, but we grew up in hospitals, always going to appointments. My mom liked to keep us all together, and it was mostly just the three of us. Most of the time, you're there in the appointments with them, you're hearing all the things the doctor is saying, and you're growing up really fast. You find out how precious life is and how protective you are of your sibling. And Jessica and I were 3 years apart, and we definitely fought. We would roughhouse sometimes, but it was always in the back of our minds. Don't touch the chest, no hitting, no punching, no kicking, stuff like that. Yeah, we grew up really fast. And I'm happy that my mom kept me with them when they went to doctor's appointments because I really did not like being out of the loop. I always wanted to know what was going on and what was happening next. So, yeah, I think maybe growing up so fast and being protective of your sister is maybe the hardest part because a lot of people don't understand what you're going through.
No, you're 100% right about how precious life can be. And a lot of people don't fully appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely.
Stephen, welcome to the CHG podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Stephen, what was life like for you growing up with an older sister with a CHD and a younger sister who is heart healthy like you?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I never had a thought in my mind growing up that Cora was ever going to not be with us, which sounds crazy, but I just always knew that she'd be all right. Something deep inside of me was just saying, she's got this. And so far, she has. She's living alone at university now, which my parents didn't see coming. It always led to a lot more opportunities. For example, meeting cool people, doing cool stuff. I don't know how many people can say this, but I went on a Make-A-Wish trip when I was in kindergarten. And now I still show up to those Make-A-Wish events every so often. They're a really great community to be a part of. I don't want to say that I'm glad that she had it, but I think that it's such a part of my life that it's just always been there. I remember growing up since I was like 2 hearing, yeah, Cora's always been unique. There's always been something unusual that other people don't understand. And they don't have to. I mean, I'm thankful they don't have to, but it's been good.
I think what you're trying to say is that it's kind of hard growing up when you've got an older sibling who has medical needs going on and you feel like your parents are always pushing their attention onto them. You kind of grow up feeling overlooked.
I wouldn't say that it's hard. I've certainly enjoyed the lack of oversight, but I wouldn't call it hard. I'd call it
Yeah,
interesting.
you can kind of push
Yeah,
the boundaries a little bit more without them knowing.
I guess so. If they're listening, that's not true.
I love that. Well, you were a middle child too, right? So, do you feel
Yes.
like you had a typical middle child lifestyle?
I don't know what lifestyle means in this instance, but I guess so. I mean, also, this is probably going to be talked about later, but being the only neurotypical child probably had more of an effect on the attention than the hard stuff did.
Your younger sister is not neurotypical. She also has challenges.
She has ADHD, which I guess is fairly common, but yeah.
You're kind of in a unique position. You're a middle child. You're the only neurotypical child, and you're the only boy.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty unique position. I never really thought about it like that. I guess it's just always the hand I've been dealt. A good hand, I'd say. A hand nonetheless.
I think it's
Yeah.
remarkable how all of you siblings seem so well adjusted considering the unusual circumstances you had growing up with a sibling who, let's face it, was facing life or death situations. And you do all seem very mature. I have felt that it did cause my older child who did not have a heart defect to grow up in a way that was a little bit different than if he would have had a sibling who did not have a heart defect. Let's go on to the next question. Michelle, your brother really did beat the odds considering he was only expected to live to the age of 2. And now he's married and has children. So, can you tell us how congenital heart disease has affected his family?
Greg was a great brother and a great man. I can really only share my perspective as a sibling as the relationship evolved over time. We had similar parallel developmental paths, meaning we were close in age. I married in 1992, shortly after meeting my husband, and he subsequently married his wife, Michelle, shortly after I got married and started his family. We certainly paralleled each other. He had more kids than I did. He had 4, and I had 2, but our oldest grew up together. His oldest is currently a speech and language pathologist and getting married in July. His third child was impacted by congenital heart disease, but fortunately was able to have a complete 5B repair in infancy and is attending college, participating in the college soccer team. His youngest is graduating high school, and I'm looking forward to participating in the graduation celebrations as she launches into college. I think what this highlights is the importance that Greg had an opportunity for life and participation in a family. Granted, he had the single ventricle disease and wasn't bearing children as a female, but his family, his wife, and his four children are celebrating milestones and celebrating them without his presence, which makes me sad every time I think about that.
Yeah, that would be so hard. It sounds like they live close to you, though, in distance?
I'm in Chicago and I work as a nurse practitioner at Lurie Children's in the single ventricle field, actually. And his family relocated throughout their journey of building their family. And they're currently in Rochester, Minnesota. You can get there by a short plane ride or by a longer car ride.
Yeah. You said that one of his children did have a heart defect, but that it was taken care of in childhood. I didn't quite catch what the defect was.
She had double out right ventricle and she was able to have a complete biventricular repair in infancy by a surgeon who actually did my brother's pacemaker as he was an adult.
Wow. Wow. So she had a very similar condition. Not quite as severe as Greg's, it sounds like, but was he
Correct.
alive when she had to have the surgery?
Yeah. Yeah. He was alive and present. And at the time, I was working in Milwaukee as a nurse practitioner. So had a unique experience of being a sibling and provider during their journey.
It must have been such a blessing for your family to have you there to help explain anything they didn't understand.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a very unique situation for sure. And I was very blessed that there were really strong providers that prenatally was diagnosed, was able to come up with a plan, and she clearly had a good outcome.
Yeah, such a blessing. Such a blessing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing so much, Michelle. I find your circumstances to be so amazing. And now I get a chance to talk to Stephen. So, Stephen, being the only boy with two sisters can be challenging in and of itself. But aside from dealing with the heart condition, we learned in April that Cora also has autism. So, what was more challenging to deal with, her heart defect or her autism?
This may be surprising, but it's just something I think about occasionally, actually. So the surprising answer is autism. 100%. Like 1,000%. It's easier to
I'm
deal with the heart
actually
condition.
not surprised.
Really?
Actually, yeah, and the reason why is I have another podcast that I'm the executive producer of, and that host had a daughter who had a heart condition and autism, and he has said for the last 8 years that I've known him that the autism was definitely the hardest part to deal with. But I'm curious, he was talking from a dad's perspective, so I wanna know, how was it challenging for you as a brother?
Cora got diagnosed a little bit after the transplant, I think. I don't remember when it was, but it was all sorts of things that in hindsight, I know I was young, but there was a lot of things that I should have realized, hold on, maybe there's something that isn't normal here. For example, I don't know if she wants me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. She used to cry when we took down holiday decorations because she didn't want the holiday to end, which
Yeah.
sounds like something that you'd think, oh, how cute. But this is when she was like 11 years old.
Uh-huh.
And it
He
was
didn't
always
like change.
didn't like change. And that, which is why we're so glad that she's doing well at university right now. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah, that's a huge change.
moving out of the house and all, which, yeah, for me, when I say something is easy, for example, earlier when I said that the hard stuff was always easy, my thought process was it was possible to deal with. So therefore it was easy because I dealt with it, which probably isn't the correct way of thinking about things like that, but it's the way that I thought about it anyways. And I guess with Cora's heart defect, it would cause problems occasionally after the transplant. I was so young when the transplant happened. I was in third grade.
Mhm.
So after the transplant and after all the appointments, it really didn't affect me that much daily, if I'm being honest, the hard stuff. She was still my sister. Like she was still just a normal kid, other than
Yeah.
the transplant stuff. But the autism was definitely a daily effect. That certainly made things interesting in my house. I'll just say that.
I think
Uh,
that's very sweet and generous of you to say that. Obviously, you love your sister, and I'm sure it was confusing for you at times that she had behaviors that didn't seem typical?
I was kind of used to it with it being a part of my life for so long, and also the same with my little sister. As the middle child and with Cora's brain stuff as well, she also has ADHD like Emily. It certainly makes you take a leadership position. This is another anecdote. When we first dropped Cora off at university, she was walking away from the car, and my mom worries about Cora a lot, worries a lot more than I think is necessary. But then again, I'm not a mother, so I don't really understand in the same way that she does. We were dropping her off at university and she was starting to look lost. And she turned to me in the car and said, "Steven, go out there and help her." And I said, "No, she's an adult. She's got this." And, and then made her drive away.
I love it. I love that story because when Hope was growing up, he's 3 years younger than her brother. And I used to call Joey the normalizer because when I would be a little overprotective,
Yeah.
he would be like, "No, mom, you just got to let it go. Just step back."
Yeah.
And my husband, Frank, is on this and he can attest to that. Joey made
Yeah.
things more normal. So good for you. You helped to normalize it. Hey, when you have to hand your kid off to surgery, open heart surgery, it
Oh, it's
does make
crazy.
you a little overprotective. You feel that you are responsible for your child's life in a totally different way than you do when you have a child who has a healthy heart. And it's
Yeah.
very easy for us to be overprotective. And you siblings, you guys help to remind us that we need to just let go sometimes and let them experience life. So I love it. That was fabulous. You're such a good brother. On to the other brother, Roy. Your brother had multiple open heart surgeries before his transplant. Do you feel that you and your brother had a normal brother-brother relationship, or do you feel that your relationship with your brother was different than other boys that you knew who had brothers?
I would say both. A lot was very classic brothers growing up together. Guy was one of my best friends growing up. He was the best man at my wedding. Just great memories of our childhood, playing catch in the backyard, swimming in the pool together in the summer, cracking up on the sofa, watching movies. The part that was not as typical was the caution and concern that would come up sometimes. Guy had to be careful of what physical activities he did. He had to be cautious sometimes with what he ate. So despite him being the older one and that I looked up to him so much, sometimes I'd find myself helping him deal with those things, reminding him of some of those restrictions or things to do to stay healthy. Some of what Steven said sounds familiar to me too. Helping him with my parents and giving him more space because everybody worried about him and wanted to take care of him. I wanted to advocate for him also to have his independence and do more. And I think when I really reflect though about my relationship with my brother, one of the things that I think is so special about it is how much he inspired me. He's a hero to me. And I think a hero to so many of the people who know him, especially in our family. He's inspiring. Life gets difficult. If I think about my life today, sometimes I have a problem to deal with at work, something unexpected to deal with at home. And those things may seem like a big deal in the moment, but then I always end up reminding myself of the perspective. Growing up, seeing the real challenges that my brother faced and the way he just so bravely took them on and dealt with them. He never pitied himself. He never even seemed scared going into surgery after surgery or dealing with obstacle after obstacle. He just achieved so much. It's pretty common for younger brothers to look up to their older brother. Just the amount that I respect him for all that he's done and find him so inspiring, I think is maybe a little bit extra.
We're also doing an episode with Guy's electrophysiologist. And it's funny what you say about being inspired and considering him a hero because the electrophysiologist said the same thing. So Guy has definitely touched a lot of people's lives and inspired them and given them maybe a different perspective. Did things change a lot after he had the stroke? Were you still living at home when that happened?
That's an interesting question. Soon after birth, Guy had his first neurological complications stemming from his cardiac history. So he's always had some set of challenges, and he had some setbacks later in life with some of those neurological things. There's definitely been a history throughout for him of 2 steps forward or 3 steps forward and 1 step back. A few years ago, had some complications, and it made it harder for him to walk. And he's began walking with a cane, and Having a little bit of balance issues. We've all tried to help him figure out the right level of independence. He sometimes will visit me in New York City, and it can be hard to walk on the sidewalk when your balance is a little off. I get into very protective mode as his younger brother, but also try to be brave for him too, and giving him the space to do those things.
Thank you so much. That was very thoughtful.
This next question is for everyone. How did your life change once your siblings discovered they needed a transplant? Stephen, would you like to answer first?
Yes. I actually remember the exact circumstances when I found out that my sister would need a transplant. My aunt was visiting our house and we were all sitting in the living room. It was around Christmas time. I don't know why she was the one to break the news. She said, Corey, you're going to need to get you a new heart one day. That's not news that she wanted to hear. She started crying. And I remember thinking, oh, that's going to be something in a couple years. I was really young at the time. I think I was in like first or second grade. After that, there was this joke among my house. We called it the call. And the call was basically like when we found out that Cora would get her new heart, like when she'd actually get it. I'm going to tell when the call happened. Me and my dad have always been fans of rugby. We were in Chicago watching a game. Since my dad is an immigrant from Ireland, we've always supported the Ireland team. And they were playing in Chicago against New Zealand, which were the best team in the world at that time. Not anymore. And like in the middle of the first half, we get the call. My dad just grabs my arm and says, we have to go. Like all times we could have gotten it. Had to be now, which sounds a little bit selfish, but it was pretty funny. We didn't even stop at the hotel. I don't know how he managed to get us a flight to Philadelphia, which is where her transplant was. I remember my dad watching like a play-by-play on his phone in the airport terminal. And Ireland actually won that game, which was the first time in 112 years that Ireland has beaten the best team in the world of New Zealand. It's just a funny story. I guess that's a good analogy for how a transplant can affect your life.
My dad also comes from a family of Irish immigrants, so I grew up supporting the Irish rugby team, so I can wholeheartedly sympathize with you on that one.
Embark on a heartwarming odyssey with Baby Heart's Pressure Gateway to uplifting stories for the CHD community. Introducing the Heart of a Heart Warrior book series, inspiring those born with heart defects and their loved ones. Discover the heart of a mother, the heart of a father, and my brother needs an operation. Books celebrating strength, love, and familial support. Visit babyheartspress.com and be part of our loving community, uplifting hearts one story at a time.
You are listening to the CHC podcast. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our show, please send an email to Anna Jaworski at anna@thechcpodcast.com. That's anna@thechcpodcast.com. Now, back to the CHC podcast.
So welcome back. We're talking about siblings to heart warriors in today's episode, and now our audience is able to share their experiences or questions with us. Today we have Frank Jaworski, the love of my life, who is also the biggest patron of Hearts Unite the Globe, the nonprofit that pays for our podcast. And I think during this section, we will also allow our producers, who are volunteers and patrons, Annie Alchek and Guy Simkhay, who is not only a producer, but also the brother of Roy, who you've been listening to earlier. I'm going to start with you, Frank, since you are our numero uno patron. What did you think about this episode? And do you have any questions you would like to ask of the panelists?
Well, I think it was fascinating. Our heart child, Hope, is almost 30, and her brother, Joey, has been a fantastic support for her throughout all of her surgeries and everything else, and been there for her. Even when Hope had her last surgery when she was 17 years old and Joey was 20, he was there for her emotionally when he could be. I would like to go talk to Joey now and ask him some more questions to see more of the kind of things that he felt and why he did what he did. It's inspiring to listen to all of you because, bluntly, you're not superheroes. You're human beings who are dealing with a difficult situation with somebody that you cared about very deeply. And it affected you personally in the kind of time that your parents had to spend with you because they were distracted by their heart child. And it affected you personally in the sense that you loved your siblings and you wanted to take care of them too. And I think all of you were wonderful to your families, and they're lucky to have you.
What I think is fascinating about this is that we didn't hear anybody expressing jealousy And we know that with the siblings having to be in and out of the hospital to the cardiologists and possibly other specialists too, we know that Amy's sister, Jessica, also ended up having kidney problems when Hope was younger. We had a scare for about 2 or 3 months that she might have cancer as well. And we were having to go back and forth to the hospital a lot to have blood drawn to make sure that she didn't have cancer. So many more appointments than a sibling of a heart healthy sibling would have to go through. And yet there were no jealousies that came out or feeling like it was unfair and my parents weren't there for me. It seems like there was so much compassion from all of these siblings. Don't you think, Frank?
Yes, I do. I think that the compassion and the empathy that they displayed for their family and their siblings is the best things that people can do. It's the quality you want in your family.
Roy?
I think one of the things that comes to mind for me as I'm hearing you guys talk about it, now that I'm a parent, I also just have a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation for my parents because, yeah, I definitely didn't feel jealous about the time they spent with my brother and his heart issues. They somehow managed to just spend so much time with each of us. But now I have the perspective as a parent, and I know how much mental energy and time was going into worrying and taking care of my brother, but somehow it never felt that way. It never felt like I was missing out on anything. And that gives me a lot of appreciation for them and all they did there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as we get older how we look at our parents differently and we experience things differently. I know that Joey had a daughter and they detected a heart murmur with her, which is not uncommon when a baby is born. It's actually very common for babies to have a heart murmur. But I think we were all on pins and needles that first year of life before she went back to the cardiologist and they let us know that the murmur's gone. She's okay. Her heart's okay. And I think maybe it gave Joey a little bit of an appreciation for what we had to go through when he experienced that himself. Did any of you who have children experience something similar to that? I know, Amy, you don't have any children, but Michelle, you do.
My perspective was not so much the congenital heart disease, but the fact that I'm a nurse by training. So I think I always over medicalize things in general with my kids. When I had my daughter, who's now 27, I couldn't work in the NICU when I was pregnant. I think it wasn't necessarily the congenital heart disease. It was just the medical care in general.
I think the fact that you went into the medical field was influenced by the fact that your brother had a heart defect, don't you think?
Yeah, that's for sure. Definitely my curiosity leaned hard into that, particularly because he had a Tonsian when I was a teen and I didn't really know exactly what that was. And I think it definitely influenced my trajectory moving into nursing in general. And I very quickly figured out that I didn't like caring for adults. I liked caring for kids. But I think from a parent perspective, I think being in nursing, I always wanted to know how many ml. So I had a hard time breastfeeding and things like that.
It's fascinating. Ayrton,
My sibling story is obviously quite a lot different to all of yours because with my brother, we sadly didn't know until he passed away. It just makes me appreciate the kind of life that we had with him because we didn't have all the hospital appointments. We didn't have the cardiologist. We didn't have any of that. He was still fit and healthy until the day he died, which I know sounds kind of bad in a way.
yeah, that seems so unfair that you had this condition that was undiagnosed. And so you missed out on experiencing some of the things these other siblings have. And
Yeah,
then you tragically lost him.
but
But
now,
had you not known about
but
that, you might not have
yeah,
been diagnosed yourself.
yeah, which is the other side of the double-edged sword that we're dealing with.
All right. Did you want to say something else?
Yeah, you're on about having a newfound appreciation for your parents. Me having this one QT syndrome, I now kind of understand why my mum worries so much about me.
Yep,
Yeah,
I get that.
she's like, "Have you spoken to a doctor yet?" No, you need to speak to a cardiologist. Yes, mum. Yes, mum. I'll do that. Yes, mum.
Guy, I'm so glad you told us that we needed to invite your brother on the program.
Me too. I have something to tell Michelle. I also had Dr. Puga as my surgeon at Mayo Clinic until he retired. So we have that in common with your brother. I really appreciate learning about your brother's story more in depth. Thank you for sharing that.
That is a wonderful commonality that we share. And I wish I would have met him, but at the time, family was so busy, and I never actually got a chance to visit my brother or meet any of the care team during his hospitalization. But he's a legend for sure. And what a common thread. Thank you for sharing that, guy.
And also, my brother, I'm very moved by what you said. I love you.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. It was really kind of you to include me.
I love that. Annie, the woman who has been keeping time and doing all the hard work behind the scenes for us, come on out from behind the screen and tell us what you thought about today's show.
Oh my gosh. So there are some shows from time to time where I can't wait for someone to pick on me and say, what do you have to, your thoughts? This is one of the first shows where I wanted to just go past Ayrton and Anna and start speaking and laughing and to have memories. It was moments I just wanted to be like, Rory, Stephen, Amy, like just wanted to go right in out of the gate. And I'm like, hold back, hold back. So a little bit about me. It's interesting. I was putting all the pieces together regarding the siblings that are speaking and that you're all younger siblings. I'm an older CHDer and I have a younger sibling who is heart healthy. We're both adopted, different biological families, but as the oldest sibling with the congenital heart defect, I'm 45, single ventricle with DOR, DERV, and pulmonary stenosis and everything. Rory and Stephen, yours was the ones I connected the most in terms of the stories, not just because of what you were all saying, but how you were saying it. Just reminded me of my little brother. Granted, he's not little anymore, he's taller than me, but there were things that I wanted to think about because you guys seem a bit more mature and were able to handle your siblings' congenital heart defect. It seems in my eyes a lot easier. When we thought I was dying in my late 20s, I've been told I might have a month to live, if even. And we were unsure and waiting for a final result on a test. And that's when my brother told me for the first time that he cried and feared every time I had to go and see the doctor. It didn't matter if it was for a procedure. It didn't matter if it was for an open heart surgery or even just a cath or simple seeing my doctor for a checkup. Every time he was waiting for them to say, I'm dying and I'm going to be dead and he'll never see me again, which breaks my heart because it wasn't until he was much older to tell me this truth. He didn't want to tell me this truth because he felt like I had so much on me, he had to keep it inside. And hearing how everybody is just able to move forward and continuing being what they considered their normal. You guys didn't know anything other than this. It's just amazing. All of you. It's just so amazing. And it gives me more perspective and appreciation, not only for my parents, but my younger sibling the most, because you're sitting there thinking what's going to happen next. But at the same time, you're also not really thinking forward because it's your normal. I love that. I love that you had that normalcy of fighting, but also being best friends, but knowing that if you were fighting physically, you had to be very gentle about it. I thought that was pretty cute because I was like, that must be pretty interesting for boys to be horsing around and all of a sudden you're just like, wait, got to be careful, not the chest. All right, I got your arm instead or something like that. So this has just been such an amazing podcast. It really has. It's so great.
Yeah, the whole thing around it made me laugh as well because I remember the fights I used to get into with Edward, and we were anything but gentle. I mean, we would leave each other black and blue at times.
Oh gosh. So I was not physical with my brother because he was actually very sensitive in a very positive way. But we would scream and yell, and then we would both be grounded for screaming and yelling. So thank you guys. This was great.
The CHC Congenital Heart Conversations podcast is a presentation of Hearts Unite the Globe, or HUG, and is part of the HUG Podcast Network. HUG is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing resources to the congenital heart defect community to enrich the lives of our community members. For free CHD resources, please visit our website at congenitalheartdefects.com. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed in the podcast are not those of Hearts Unite the Globe, but of the hosts and guests, and are intended to spark discussion about issues pertaining to congenital heart disease or bereavement. Annie, as our producer, do you have any questions or comments you would like to make of our panelists?
Yes, actually, I did have a few questions, but my biggest question, and it stems from my own brother, because I always felt like I had to protect him a lot from my medical things. And once I knew about how he felt, I actually became even more protective, to the point where I wouldn't tell him anymore that I was having anything done with my heart or any issues. There were times I'd actually have to say to my mom, you know what, let's not tell JP, that's his nickname, anything until we know for sure what's going on, because I don't want him stressed out and worrying. So the whole family wouldn't say a word until we knew. And then I would gently either break it to him or it would be a positive thing. And this is where my question stems from. I'm going to ask each panelist. Do you feel like your CHD sibling tried to protect you from what was going on with their own CHD so you wouldn't be so worried about them? Rory?
100%. I really have got visions of Guy going off into surgery and just giving everybody a big smile and a thumbs up, projecting that he's not worried. I talked earlier about how inspiring his bravery was, but at this point now I'm old enough to look back and realize there's no way that Guy had no fear then. I get nervous when I go for a colonoscopy, right? Surely him going for an open heart surgery was nervous, but he was definitely putting on a calm, brave face and going out there. I've never seen him nervous with the things that he was dealing with. And I just know that that can't actually be the case. He's so good at protecting me that I've never actually seen him nervous about the things he's going through.
Yeah, I can understand that completely. You want to make sure that everyone else doesn't live in the fear in your head. Thank you, Roy. Amy, your thoughts?
Yes, Jessica did, and she still does, protect us from how much she is worried, because I live with her and I know most of the time when she's talking to doctors or if she's going to a doctor's appointment, she tells me as much as possible. But I think a lot of times she doesn't want us to worry. And sometimes she and my mom are very much alike in the way that they're like, oh, this happened, don't tell so and so. And they'll both tell me things and say, don't tell Jessica or don't tell mom. And sometimes it's hard to keep all that straight. They definitely do protect us against how worried they are or how fearful they are. But the one thing Jessica's been really good about is letting us be there for her and take her to appointments if she needs that, letting us come into appointments. At some point, Jessica and I were in college together. We went to the same school. We were living downtown and my mom was living in the suburbs. So I became the one that was going with her to the appointments and we were filling my mom in. It's just been different now that we're adults and her being able to do so many things on her own now. It's just different now.
That's pretty amazing that you would go with your sister to appointments and everything, especially since at first she was trying to really protect you. But at that point, she's really letting you in right there and then on what's being said.
Yeah. At the hospitals, there's the HIPAA compliance thing that you have to sign to protect your privacy. And it's really up to the patient if they want somebody else to be there or not. And sometimes you need an advocate. So I took on that role because sometimes she would just not be feeling well. And then I'd be the one asking questions or making sure something happened. And that took a lot of pressure off my mom. So in a way, it was super stressful, but also very helpful to all of us that I could be there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Thank you.
Stephen, your thought?
For me, it was never really my sister trying to hide things from us. My parents never tried to hide things from us, but I could tell when they were worried, but they didn't say they were worried, but I could kind of figure it out. For example, my parents spent a lot more time than usual in the hospital chapel on the night of Cora's transplant, which I could tell they were very worried because it's a terrifying thing. I'm terrified when I'm the doctor if I'm worried about something like that I have something that I'm not supposed to. And I'm glad that my parents have a line that they say about that sort of thing. Don't be worried unless I think you need to be worried. I never worried about Cora because my parents would tell me if I needed to be worried. And they didn't really give all the ins and outs. I mean, I sat in on a lot of appointments. I was pretty young too, so I had no idea what they were saying, which kind of alleviated my worries. Honestly, the hospital is a comforting environment for me after spending so much time there in my early youth. The smell of rubbing alcohol gives me good memories. They never tried to hide things. Maybe just try to let me know slower when I was younger, at least. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's interesting that you would see rubbing alcohol as a positive experience. It brings up those memories, the happy memories, which I'm really glad for you that that's what that smell is, because I know as a patient, there are certain smells, and that's kind of one of them where I have to basically prepare myself for because everything that has happened with those specific smells is not a positive one. It's more negative and scary. So, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I am right there with you, Annie. There are certain smells in the hospital that will trigger me and make me put walls up. I can feel it happening. Now I want to ask Joey. So, Joey, because he had to go to the
What the
hospital so much, what does this smell do to you? Because it definitely has a reaction for me. So I find that fascinating that Stephen feels like that smell evokes good feelings. How awesome. I wish that were true for everybody. That's
I
really
know.
amazing.
But this is what I'm loving so much about this specific sibling one and everyone and their answers and how strangely unique, but also similar they are. Michelle, I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you, what are your thoughts on my question?
I think about it as a child and as an adult. And I think in how I answer your question about whether or not Greg tried to protect me from things that he worried about as an adult, I think he was pretty transparent about his health. And I was in a unique situation where I, as a provider in the field, knew about the pathway forward, including the risks and benefits. So I think I didn't necessarily feel that. But as a child, I think it's definitely hard to know for sure. We never really did have that conversation. And I also think developmentally, as a teen, hard to answer that because all I knew was that he was my brother and I fought with him and we wrestled and yelled at each other. I threw my clarinet at him and we grew and did things that all kids did. He tried to show off in water sports behind the boat, and he definitely was bluer in the water and had less endurance, but he never really tried to shelter that. I do think that he would always find a way to flip script with his lack of endurance and try to find a way to spin it in a positive way and use humor and laughter, which I appreciate to this day. And developmentally, I am certain now, if I ask him that question going into the Fontaine as a teen, he had a lot of fear and there was a lot of things probably that I wasn't privy to. But I also was at an age when you're a freshman in high school, you don't really think about things like that in a way. But I don't know. I I
That's okay. You have a very unique situation because, in a sense, your ability of looking back at things kind of stops at a certain point, and you don't have that opportunity or availability to be able to ask your sibling and say, well, what was your thought? What were you thinking? What were your worries? You try to remember the parts that you have seen when you look back versus
mhm,
asking during the present time.
yeah.
So I can definitely understand. But I have to say, like with you and everyone else, when you've responded, there has been moments where I have just laughed out loud. And I'm very thankful I'm muted. Hearing that you threw a clarinet at your brother means that
No, I laughed out
Oh,
loud.
he would never let me forget that, honestly. And his way of causing laughter when, through everybody's better at something in life. When I just happened to be better behind the boat on skis than he was, but he could sail a boat. And when he was in charge of driving, he would always stop the motor and say, "Oh, trouble with the motor," as soon as he saw like a dead fish or an icky weed or something he knew I would find offensive because it's something he could have control over. There's so many questions that I wish I could ask him, but I don't regret any part of my life with him. I wish I could have helped support him in growing up as a teen, but I didn't have the developmental capacity to really be in the know of that.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I feel like with your job and everything, if you do see an opportunity to be able to give some support to children or teenagers or adults, in a way, you're giving that back. It may not be specifically to your brother, but it is to another patient who desperately needs your help. So thank you for that.
You can be sure that I'm the first one to call a child life specialist, a social worker, or a psychologist, or somebody to a family when I see any red flags.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot for a CHDer as well as those in the family who may not feel comfortable or afraid to speak up. And then quickly, Roy, I just wanted to say, I think that's pretty amazing that you see the positives for Guy and you're able to find those pieces in there where even on the hard days, you're still making sure that you have those moments where Guy gives you that availability of happiness and everything's all right with the double thumbs up. And those are the things you continue forward so that the relationship you have with him is one that you feel strength from and help him and advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Ayrton, do you have a question?
I wanted to ask Michelle how she is coping with the loss of a brother, because I know bereaved siblings are often the most overlooked when it comes to dealing with the loss of a loved one.
I must say that it has been a journey. And as I mentioned, I had transitioned from Boston Children's working for CD surgery to the Midwest for my husband's relocation. And at the time, I was going through a significant challenges and actually wanted to give up nursing and caregiver fatigue. And I used that time as I was transitioning my family to get some mental health for myself. And thank God I did because I didn't know I was going to need it, what I was about to go through and the trauma of losing a sibling that I had known for 45 years and unexpectedly. And you're right that there is a significant lack of support for siblings. I had been with my brother for 45 years. Greg was married for less than that. And yes, he had a family, and my parents were going through a significant grief and loss. And I will shout it off the rooftop. The entire family is needing support when you are going through a loss like this. And I felt like I was on the back burner sometimes, but getting grief and support loss was an incredibly important and powerful part of my healing. I did a lot of journaling. I saw a therapist. I got on medication. It not only helps my emotional and social support and mental health, it also helped me get back into healthcare and helping support future individuals with single ventricle physiology and fetal health. I'm in a unique situation today where I get an opportunity to care for patients and families from prenatal diagnosis until transition to adulthood. And I feel like it is a unique gift that God had a plan for my brother, for my family, and for the future of congenital heart disease. So it's been a journey that it has not been an easy one. This time of year, I remember the day that I got the text from my brother. I was sitting with a bunch of nursing colleagues in Madison, and we were actually just talking about my brother and where he was at in the process. And he said, "Call me." And I remember that call to this day, standing outside the nursing building and trying to rejig plans to get to Mayo because the call was there and we needed to support the next steps of the road. And I needed to call my mom to try to help support how she was going to get there and the processes. So I think it's an uncharted territory that is unspoken too often, but I am grateful that my family was there to help support the journey as well. And certainly my kids felt that impact. And I am grateful that they had the patience to allow their mother to heal.
Yeah, it can be very challenging. I mean, for me, it's been 25 years this year since I lost my brother, but I still have really fond memories of him. And you're on about throwing your clarinet at Greg. One memory I have of Edward, we were arguing about something, and I had this cup of water in my hand, and he was like, "You wouldn't dare throw this cup of water." And the next thing that I remember is that I'm just throwing it at full force in his face. And he goes downstairs yelling at my mum. And I was like, well, he dared me to throw it. Things like that I can remember.
Those are wonderful memories. And I'm so glad that you shared it. Thank you for sharing with me.
Ayrton, you are too much. Well, this has been amazing. Our co-producer, Guy, has one more question, and he would ask it, but the battery just went out on his microphone. So I will ask it for him. And he said, how has this conversation changed how you see yourself with your CHD sibling? And Rory, since you are his sibling, I will let you start off the conversation with that.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Guy, for the question. I don't think I ever realized until this conversation how many other sibling pairs were going through something as similar. I always thought this was so unique to us and Guy's medical situation and the circumstances of it, but that was one thing that really changed for me. I was realizing that there's a whole community of people here that have such a shared experience around this, around the worries and the way that it affects us. And mostly I just want to go give my brother a hug right now. I wish we were in the same place so I can give him a hug right now.
Oh, okay. Guy, you just got a virtual hug from Rory. I want to hug all of you.
I
That's
know, I do
amazing.
too.
Okay, Amy, what about you, sweetheart? How has this conversation changed how you see yourself with Jessica?
Jessica and I are still very much best friends, and I honestly didn't know there were so many siblings out there that also grew up like this. So I'm in awe of everybody, and I'm glad to know there are other people who have experienced similar situations. I can tell from everybody else's comments that we would all basically drop anything or everything to help our siblings. So I definitely have so much compassion and love for my sister, and that's never going to change, even though we annoy each other sometimes.
That's what makes you sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so lucky to have her.
And now this makes me really wish that all of you could have gone to a camp when you were kids that was just for siblings. And there are some camps out there. There are sib shops out there. And when Hope was, I want to say maybe 8 or 9, we went to Camp Joy in Ohio. And it was a camp for families who had children with congenital heart defects. And they separated the siblings from the heart warriors, and they each went off and did their own activities. And I was so thankful that Joey had that. But I really think that's the kind of thing that all siblings need. And I really feel like from a certain age, we should strive harder to give those siblings a chance to voice their feelings. Because I think for Joey anyway, and I don't know if the rest of you feel this way too, I think he was so young when it first happened because he was just a toddler. I don't think he really even knew how to give voice. And Stephen, you can probably relate to that too. I don't think he even knew how to give voice to some of his experiences. Okay, back to the question. Thank you for sharing, Amy. Stephen, I'll let you go next, sweetie. How has this conversation changed how you see yourself with Cora?
I kind of want to send a text message now. She's away at university, and I've never been very good at communicating with my family. All my family can attest to that. I kind of want to send a message and tell her I love her. I haven't really talked to her. I'd say a couple weeks, which is a lot for me. She's away at university, and this is the first time she's really stayed away from home other than for a long period of time that isn't a hospital. And yeah, I just wish to communicate more now.
I love that. Michelle, how has this conversation changed the way you view your relationship with your sibling?
I think it reminds me how often that I shout out on a regular basis that congenital heart disease is the number one birth defect. And it really reminds me that I'm not the only sibling impacted by congenital heart disease. I think that conversation about parents or siblings, I had no idea what was going on when Greg went off to have a transplant. I think that we need to pay attention to siblings more.
Mhm. Yeah. You guys are amazing.
Thank you for joining us today on the CHE podcast. We hope you'll join us next month. The August episode will be about siblings of adult transplant recipients. Until then, I'm Erton Beatty.
And I'm Anna Jaworski. Have a great day and keep those congenital heart conversations going on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And don't forget to leave a review.
Thank you for joining us. The CHC podcast can be heard monthly wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram to continue the conversations. Join the Hearts Unite the Globe Patreon group and become part of our town hall meetings. It's simple. Just visit www.heartsunitetheglobe.org and select the tab that says Donate to Hug with Patreon. Then you too can be part of the conversation.